Story 1. For context, we live in an apartment building with 6 units. There are 2 parkings on each side of the building for a total of 8 parking spots. Both entrances are wide, like 2-3 cars wide, but the parkings don't reach at the back of the building. Only the sides can't make a U-turn. Both entrances on the street, and an elementary school is right at the end of that street, 2 houses down. There is a roundabout in front of that school for parents to drop off and pick up their kids. The morning aren't that bad as most kids walk or come by bus, or the parents very quickly drop them off into the roundabout. But lunches are crazy. My fiancé comes back home during his lunch hour and always has to tell at least 3 parents to move from the entrance of our driveway. They don't park in the driveway, just in front of it, 2 or 3 cars usually. We can also see them park in front of other people's driveways. It would be fine if they were just parked on the street, but they keep blocking us. Their answers are usually, "Can't you wait 5 min while I get my kid?" or "You've got space to leave the driveway," or they ignore us completely. We called the school multiple times before to tell them what happened, but it seems the parents could use some lessons in listening skills, as the problem never went away. Well, this week we've had enough. Parking illegally in front of a driveway is something the local police was very interested in, especially after 4 houses and 3 apartment blocks called them one after the other on the same day Monday. We all called back Tuesday when it happened again, and they told us, "We hear you. Just make sure your cars aren't parked in front of your own driveways, and we'll take care of it." That night, the town had posted a notice on their page to not park in front of driveways when picking up dropping off your kids, and that a ticket could be issued. Subtle foreshadowing here. Well, yesterday was the day. 2 police cars came on the street and blocked in anyone who wanted to leave. They had prepared multiple infraction tickets, ready to be filled. They flagged down every single car that was parked even an inch in front of a driveway and issued tickets. The whole thing took at least an hour, as they wouldn't let anyone leave until everyone got their ticket and their gentle reminder not to park illegally. There was school today, and we allowed an officer to park in our driveway to supervise the dropping off picking up of kids at lunch. Guess the word got around fast as no one stopped in front of anyone's driveways. The officer said next time it happens, take a picture and send it to his email. A picture is a good proof of a crime committed, and in a small town like ours, finding people like them is the highlight of their days. So all ends well for us, and not too good for the parents with poor listening skills. Story 2. So my friends and I are moving September 11th out of LA to these luxury apartments in Tempe, Arizona. There will be 6 of us living there. We are all on the lease and have already put down a deposit. We will be splitting the monthly rent. It is $2,160 a month for the cost of the apartment, bringing everyone's total to $360 each for rent. The apartment comes fully furnished. It has 3 bedrooms, each have walk-in closets and their own bathroom, a living room, a kitchen, a sunroom and 2 balconies. The place has community Wi-Fi throughout the entire building. We are going to be in the main building, so the Wi-Fi signal shouldn't be too bad. We are not paying for cable. None of us really watch TV. We do have to split the cost of water and electricity, and that's $200, so it's $30 a person. So we each have to pay probably around $400 a month, plus the cost of food, but we can eat cheaply if we want. We are all 21 years old and girls, if that matters. This is what the apartment complex offers for amenities, if anyone is curious. Heated infinity pool with sun deck, hot tub and fire pits, indoor pool and spa, outdoor grilling area and bar, 3-story fitness center and motion studio, indoor golf simulator, lounge club with coffee bar, 3 clubhouse rooms with TVs, fireplaces, pool tables, board games, Xboxes and Wiis, movie room, business center and 2 meeting rooms, and a surveillanced mail room. Anyways, my cousin who is 23, lives in Flagstaff, wants to move in with us and wants to bring her friend. She still lives at home and found out about me moving into these apartments because my aunt told her. They aren't on the lease and there's really no room for them. They said they don't mind sleeping on the couch or floor. My cousin and her friend both don't work. I told her that I am not willing to pay for anything for her or her friend. She got mad and said, "But you can afford to live in those nice apartments. Clearly you have extra spending money." I told her that doesn't mean I want to spend it on you. She called me a selfish person, and she said she gets yelled at by her mom a lot, and it's not fair that I get to live in a nice place while she gets to suffer at home. Then she said I must hate her. No, I don't hate her, but I am not paying for two people to sit around the place and do whatever while everyone else in the apartment goes to work. She then asked if my friends could pay for her and her friend. I said they don't even know you, so no, they are not going to do that. My cousin then asked what if her mom pays for her rent and food, and I said, well, if she does, that's great, but the second that money stops coming in and you still don't have a job, you're gone. She said, but you can't kick me out because you're not the landlord. I said, you're not on the lease, so I think I can. She is not in college, not working, and expecting free handouts. No, I don't get free handouts, neither does she, at least not from me or my friends. I don't care if she thinks I'm being mean. Nobody else is paying for me to stay there, other than me. Same for my friends. My friends, roommates, are also like no to them moving in when I told them, and I agreed like they are being ridiculous. If she shows up on the 11th, that would be pretty funny since she doesn't know what apartment we are in. If her mother wants to pay for everything for her and her friend, that's one thing. But I want that in writing from her mother, and I told her that. Cousin said that's stupid because we are family, and you don't do that to family. She also said I don't get why you won't give me a chance to get a job once I move in. I promise I will get a job if you give me a chance. Then she started screaming and swearing at me and calling me names. I just hung up on her. Now her mom keeps calling me and leaving voicemails asking why I am being so mean to her and that she's very upset right now. It's like I have been working 40+ hours a week, busting myself off as a server at a restaurant and making $17.50 an hour, on top of keeping up with my college classes. If you think I'm going to pay a penny for my cousin and her friend to do nothing to themselves and mooch off me, you're out of your mind. Family or not, I don't care. It's not happening. My cousin can call me whatever derogatory name she wants. My aunt can try and guilt trip me all she wants. I'm about ready to call my aunt back with the monthly costs for both of them and say if you want to pay for them, that's fine, but I want it in writing. The second you stop paying, they are gone. If she doesn't do that, they don't move in, and I don't think she would do that anyways because they aren't exactly rich. Or I should say to her, well, they don't have jobs and I don't think it's fair for me to have to pay for them while they sit around and do God knows what around the place all day. Everyone living in the apartment is working. Nobody is living there for free. So tell me how you think this is fair. There also isn't really any room for them either. She will probably get pretty angry at me, but it is the truth. I later called my aunt back and told her she can pay for them if she wants and told her the cost for them. She said, are you out of your mind? Why would I pay for them? And I said, well, why would I? She said, because you are already living there. I said, what does have to do with anything? I refused to pay a penny towards either of them. She said, but your family has more money than my house, and you can just ask your parents for money if you can't afford it. I am sick of her sitting around my house all the time. I said, what makes you think I want her laying around my apartment all day, eating all my food? Make her get a job or something if you can't stand her laying around all day. She said, because then she's out of my hair and I don't have to deal with her anymore. I don't want to kick her out. She has nowhere to go. Have a heart. I said, have a heart? You have to be really kidding me right now. There is no way they are moving in here. They are 23 and 24 years old with no jobs and want to freeload. I have been working since I was 17. They have no excuse. She said your older sister would do it, and I said like hell she would, and even if she did, I'm not her, I'm me. My aunt then said I am going to call your mother and tell her how you are betraying our family. You're such an evil witch, and hung up on me. Have fun with that. My mom would agree with me and say no as well. Story 3. Okay, I have been meaning to type this up for a while, This happened at my last job back in 2018. To give some background, I was working as a data analyst at a company in the ed tech sector. For one of my projects, I created a report that we could give to the sales team that they could then use when asking clients to renew their contract. Clients were typically school systems or individual schools. The report was all graphs, even adults liked pretty pictures, and it showed the client's data on how teacher students were using the product. Then our sales guys could show, hey, X% of your students and teachers are using this X times a week, so you should sign a new contract with us. I developed this report for our biggest client and had the top people in sales all put in input when developing it. The big client renewed, which was great. They loved the report and wanted to use it for all renewals, and we had 5,000 plus clients. I had to automate the process, and everything seemed peaky until I hit a problem. The data for the report was pulled from our database, MS SQL, if you are curious. Now I was in the research department, and I did not have access to the database. Instead, our team had access to the database. If I wanted data, I had to put in a ticket, name all the data points I wanted, and I could only name one client per ticket. Also, it did their work in sprints, which are basically 2-week periods of work. The tickets were always added to the next sprint, so I ended up having to wait 4 weeks for data. This was fine for the big client report, but now that I was running this report for all renewals, the ticket system was not going to work. Now, if you have worked with sales, you know they don't typically plan out 4 weeks ahead. At least they didn't at this company. I reached out to it and requested direct access to the database, so I could stop putting in tickets and just query the data myself. Well, that was immediately denied. All data requests will be filled by only it, and as a research person, I needed to stay in my lane. You might see where this is going. I wasn't happy and sales weren't happy with the delay, but there was nothing anyone could do. So, I reached out to one of the sales managers to discuss the solution. Since data was going to take 4 weeks to arrive, could he please send me everyone that has a renewal coming up in the next 4 weeks? With 5,000 plus customers, that averages about 100 renewals a week. He smiled and understood what was going on, and happily sent me a list of 400-ish clients. Quick note, the IT team spends the day before a sprint planning the next sprint, and all tickets submitted before the sprint had to be completed during the next sprint. The sprint planning time was always Friday afternoon because the least amount of tickets rolled in. During the planning session, they would plan all the work for the next 2 weeks, for the next sprint. Any tickets that came in before 5 p.m. Friday had to be finished over the next 2 weeks. Time for malicious compliance. Armed with my list of 400 plus clients, I figured out when the next sprint started and cleared my schedule for the day before the new IT sprint started, also known as their Sprint Planning Friday. At about 1 ticket a minute, it was going to take about 6 hours and 40 minutes to submit all the tickets, so that's what I spent my whole Friday doing. Let's not forget, they had to get the data for all the tickets during the next sprint as long as I submitted them before 5 p.m. on Friday. That meant they had to take care of all 400 tickets in the next 2 weeks, plus I submitted tickets throughout their spring planning meeting, so they couldn't even plan for it all. If you are not tech savvy, this might not make sense. But if you are, let me add an extra twist to this. They used Jira at the time, and the entire IT team had the Jira app on their laptops. Most of them had push notifications set up, so they got pinged every time a ticket was submitted. I would have paid good money to be a fly on the wall during that meeting, watching a new ticket pop up about every minute. Okay, tech aside done, I didn't hear a peep from them at all that Friday. To their credit, Monday, I started getting data from my tickets. Now I had automated the reporting process on my end, so each report only took me a few minutes to run. I was churning out reports as quickly as I received the data without an issue, and sales was loving it. I saw tickets coming in from every member of the IT team, and during the second week many tickets came in after working hours, so obviously they were struggling to keep up. Again, I will give them full credit. They fulfilled every single ticket, but there were a lot of long days for them, no overtime pay either. This is of course on top of all the other tickets they needed to complete, so it was quite a stressful sprint. Undeterred, I met with the sales manager again right before the next sprint and asked for the next set of clients with renewals. Then the day before the next sprint, I began submitting tickets again. My workday started at 9 a.m. and by 10 a.m., the head of IT ran over to me. He is bug-eyed and asked me how many tickets I was planning on submitting. I told him the same amount as last time. I only had 200 this time, but he didn't know that, and I am pretty sure I saw him break on the inside. I did feel bad at this point, so I said, "Alternatively, you could just give me access to the database and I could query the data myself." I had access before noon. Story 4. So, I got my first retail job when I was 13, and now I'm 23, so I have a lot of entitled parent stories. This is one of the worst ones. Sorry for any mistakes. English is not my first language. I worked at a hotel from the time I was 15 until I turned 18, and I absolutely loved my job there. I was in charge of the kids' disco at the hotel, which meant a lot of dancing with children between the ages of 2 and 11, face painting, and walking around in a massive mascot costume. The mascot itself was adorable, but the costume was huge, and it was almost impossible to see anything while wearing it. On top of that, we weren't allowed to speak. Anything under a meter in height was completely out of my line of sight, so whenever we had the mascot walking around, someone always had to accompany us. The person walking with us essentially had to be our voice and our eyes. We could easily bump into objects or even children, so we needed someone to guide us. They also handled kids' questions and, most importantly, dealt with the entitled parents. And trust me, there was no shortage of those. A lot of entitled parents never seemed to grasp that it wasn't just their child who wanted to interact with the mascot. We constantly had parents pushing other kids out of the way, yelling at them to let their child go first, and even lifting their child over the crowd so they wouldn't have to wait. Sometimes there were as many as 200 kids in the restaurant at once, so things could get chaotic if people didn't respect the rules. And, as we all know, not everyone does. Now, enter the entitled parent. She was the definition of someone who would demand to speak to the manager, a classic example. Her family visited the hotel fairly often, and every time she managed to cause some sort of problem. The previous year, she had chased a group of children out of the inflatable play area just so her kids could have it all to themselves. So, we already knew to keep an eye on her. On this particular day, the hotel was hosting a conference, and it was also a holiday, so the restaurant was completely packed. There was no way the mascot could navigate through the crowd, so we set up a line for the kids who wanted hugs. But a line? Oh, the entitled parent was not having that, not when it came to her precious little angels. At one point, I was greeting a child in a wheelchair, which took a little extra time. That's when the entitled parent made her move. She walked straight past the queue and approached the first child and their parent. Even though I was in the mascot costume, I could clearly hear her unmistakable nasal voice. "Hello, my family and I are in the middle of dinner, and we need to say hello to the mascot as quickly as possible. So, we have to go in front of you." The little girl's father replied firmly, "We're in the middle of dinner too, and we were here first. Sorry, but your kids have to wait in line like everyone else." That, of course, did not sit well with her. "That won't do," she said, turning to her child. "Come here and say hello to the nice mascot." At this point, she was trying to push past the child in the wheelchair as well. The girl's father, still holding his ground, said, "You can't just cut in front of everyone. Set an example for your child and teach them some manners." Ouch. I knew this woman well enough to realize this was about to turn into a situation. I squeezed my companion's arm as a signal, and she immediately stepped in. "Sorry, but you need to go to the back of the line. Everyone here has to wait their turn." Karen's mood turned nasty in an instant. "You do not talk to me like that. Let's just say she called her something that isn't exactly family-friendly." She continued to argue, raising her voice as other parents began stepping in to back us up. The commotion caught the attention of the manager, who quickly rushed over. "You need to leave the restaurant now," the manager said firmly. Of course, Karen refused. The manager, remaining calm but assertive, placed a hand on her arm and said, "Please step outside with me for a moment." That's when Karen completely lost it. She started screaming at the manager, causing a scene until a waiter came over to assist. The two of them were preparing to escort her out of the restaurant and away from the children. But as they started moving her, she snapped. Karen started kicking completely out of control, and in the chaos, she actually kicked the young girl in the face. The little girl's father was a big guy, and you could see the rage on his face. He almost went after Karen, but immediately turned his attention to his daughter first, thankfully. She had a broken nose. Her mother quickly rushed over to comfort her, while her father followed after the manager, the waiter, and Karen, who was still being dragged out of the restaurant. The police were called, and charges were pressed against Karen. She and her family were thrown out of the hotel permanently. I didn't feel bad for her husband, he was just as bad as she was, but I did feel bad for the kids. The young girl who was injured still had a small scar on her nose the last few times she visited the hotel, but thankfully it wasn't anything worse. She didn't seem too traumatized by the experience either, which was a relief. After that incident, I always made sure to give her a little extra attention and care whenever she came by. Unfortunately, I don't know what ultimately happened with Karen and the police, but I never saw her again. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. Story 5. Years ago, I worked as a junior manufacturing engineer for a company that built relatively complex products. One of the stations I was responsible for was the first test station. We received the core mechanism and electronic assembly of the products directly from the production line, and I performed white box testing to ensure everything appeared correct and functioned properly before sending it to another station for assembly and black box testing. I'm intentionally avoiding discussing the specific testing methodologies used, so I'll refer to them as white box and black box, since that's the best way to describe them without going into too much detail. White box testing involves direct access to all internal components, allowing us to measure different parts and verify that each one functions correctly. Black box testing, on the other hand, is conducted after the entire unit has been enclosed, meaning we no longer have access to the internals. At that point, we are simply verifying that the product works and performs all of its intended functions. The product I'll discuss today, let's give it the codename Azure, belonged to the broader family of Blue products. These were all quite similar but varied in configuration, with some having slightly different parts. Azure was a new product, and during the first few production runs, we observed failure rates exceeding 20% at black box testing, which was the station after mine. When the engineers investigated, they found that one of the relays on the electronic control board had fused shut in those 20% of failed units. For some reason, they turned to me. My station always seemed to be the prime suspect and claimed that the failures were caused by my testing process. To provide more context, my white box testing station had both powered off and powered on testing phases. During powered on testing, we turned on newly built units for the first time. This meant that if a unit had a defect that would cause it to fail upon powering up, it would fail at my station. That's why I was always meticulous about conducting thorough powered-off tests first. My goal was to identify as many potential issues as possible before turning the unit on, ensuring it wouldn't be damaged in the process. The design engineering team, however, didn't see it that way. They were convinced that when I powered on Azure units at my station, an initial power surge was creating a significant current spike through the relays, causing them to fail. Their proposed solution: completely eliminate powered on testing during white box testing. This was a terrible idea, so I pushed back. I explained that the power supply in my test setup was designed to closely match the actual power supplies we shipped with the unit. If a power surge was indeed causing failures, that would indicate a fundamental design flaw, one that would likely cause failures in the field, even if we skipped powered on testing during white box testing. The design engineers refused to accept this possibility. Instead, they insisted the issue must be with my test setup because they were confident that their design was flawless. In response, I pulled up the datasheet for the relay and demonstrated that, given the circuit configuration and the voltage my test setup supplied, it was physically impossible for the relay to fuse in the way they claimed. They completely ignored this section of my report. It seemed they didn't consider a junior manufacturing engineer's analysis worth reviewing, preferring to trust their own assumptions instead. I had yet to see a single unit that definitively had a functioning relay before my station and a fused one after my station, evidence that would have been necessary to prove my station was the cause. The design engineers dismissed my concerns. "We don't need concrete evidence," they said. "We're sure this is what's happening." I warned them that eliminating powered-on testing would significantly reduce our test coverage. Their response? "It doesn't matter. We'll catch any issues at black box testing." This was a poor approach because our black box testing station could only tell us whether the unit was functioning. It couldn't pinpoint which specific component was causing a failure. Historically, units that failed white box testing had a repair success rate of over 70%, whereas units that failed black box testing had a success rate of less than 10% at least without going back through white box testing first. I also pointed out that other products in the Blue family had been going through the same test setup, using the same relay in the same circuit configuration, without any issues. This, as it turned out, was a mistake. What I meant was, we have other Blue family products going through the same test setup with no problems. What they apparently heard was, we have other Blue family products going through the same test setup, and they're all failing, but I just haven't noticed yet. Their response was to come back at me even harder. I fought this decision for 2 weeks, but eventually, my direct manager gave me the final order. As per directives from the design engineering team, powered-on testing was to be disabled for all Blue family products, not just Azure. For what it's worth, my manager had been on my side for most of this. He only gave me the order to avoid unnecessary conflict when it seemed like company leadership might get involved. Fine. I complied and disabled powered-on testing. As I predicted, failure rates for all Blue family products, cyan, turquoise, cerulean, and so on tripled at black box testing. Now, we had an even bigger issue, a large number of defective units and no clear way to identify the faulty components. But what about Azure? Same 20% failure rate. Nothing changed. Just as I had said from the start, my station wasn't causing the relay failures. The design engineers then spent another 3 months trying to identify the actual root cause of the relay failures. Eventually, they discovered that it was a combination of an issue with the black box testing process and an underspecified component elsewhere in the assembly. I wasn't involved in those discussions, so I don't know all the specifics. They spent a significant amount of money fixing the problem. But notably, they never came back to me to say, "Hey, it looks like you were right. The failures weren't caused by powered-on testing during white box." More importantly, they never gave me an order to re-enable powered-on testing. For months, we continued running production without powered-on testing. I waited patiently, knowing exactly what was coming next. Predictably, failure rates for all Blue family products remained high at black box testing. Since my station was no longer catching early issues, the repair rate for failed units plummeted, and we were wasting an enormous amount of time troubleshooting problems that should have been identified much earlier. I watched as production efficiency tanked. Our output slowed dramatically, rework costs skyrocketed, and leadership started demanding answers. The design engineers, of course, had none. They had been so focused on proving me wrong that they never considered the consequences of their decision. 3 months later, my manager called me into his office. "We've got a problem," he said, as if I didn't already know. He looked exhausted, like he'd spent the last several weeks putting out fires. "Leadership wants to know why our failure rates are still high. They also want to know why rework is taking longer than ever." I didn't even have to say anything. He sighed and rubbed his temples. "I know. You told them this would happen. But now, they're finally listening. They want solutions." Re-enable powered on testing for white box, I said immediately. That should be step 1. That's what I told them, he said. But the design team is still resisting. I let out a short laugh. Of course they are. So, I need you to put together a report showing exactly how much worse things have gotten since we stopped powered on testing, he said. Data, graphs, failure rates, the works. Make it undeniable. Finally, I spent the next week compiling everything. Failure rate comparisons before and after the change, rework efficiency metrics, cost increases, and even the time lost troubleshooting issues that should have been caught earlier. When I presented the report, it was devastating. Leadership couldn't ignore it. The decision came swiftly. Effective immediately, we are re-enabling powered on testing at white box. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, I told you so. I just went back to my station and turned the test equipment back on. Within a month, failure rates at black box testing dropped back down to their original levels. Rework efficiency improved and costs stabilized. Production got back on track, and the issues plaguing the company slowly faded away. The design engineers never apologized. They never acknowledged their mistake. But they also never questioned my test processes again. And that, to me, was victory enough. Story 6. This story came to me from an old coworker. It happened around 8 years ago and just blew my mind at the time. My coworker, we'll call him Teddy, was an older gentleman who lived in one of the nicer, but still not nice parts of the city, a bunch of duplex homes and row homes in a big grid. Late one night, around 1 a.m., there's a hellacious screech, crashing, sounds of breaking glass, more screeching and crashing. By the time Teddy gets out of bed and into a coat, there's only the sound of car alarms and blinking lights continuing down the block, starting with his own car out front of his house. Following the damage, there's a line of debris and honking cars, ending up at the twisted wreck of a motorcycle, and the rider is prone and motionless in the street. Teddy calls 911, and some time later the police and paramedics arrive. Motorcycle driver was later pronounced dead on arrival, and the police say he must have been going close to 100 when he hit Teddy's car. Somehow barely held onto the bike as it continued down the road and hit several other vehicles. And finally he hit a panel truck dead on, and that's likely what killed him. The biker wasn't wearing a helmet or pads, in fact was wearing boxers and a t-shirt and nothing else, not even shoes. When Teddy got the police report later, it turns out there were amphetamines in his system, which I suppose explains a lot. So Teddy's already not in the greatest shape since this is going to raise his insurance rates, despite it not being at all his fault. But the real kicker came a few weeks later. Teddy got a letter in the mail which essentially threatened that he would be sued if he didn't pay $50,000 to the mother of the deceased biker. This is how I heard about this issue, and I saw the demand letter. It was clearly not written by a real lawyer, but just to make sure, I checked the address, which was an apartment building in the city, and the state bar website did not have any records of a lawyer of that name. The case was utterly preposterous as well. Apparently, Teddy had negligently parked his car in the street, which made him at fault for this kid's drug-addled joyride's sudden stop. It went on for about 3 pages, mostly bad legalese and threats that if he didn't pay they would sue for millions. I told Teddy to call his insurance company and forward them the letter. The biker hit his car, so this would be auto liability whether he was driving it or not. Plus 99% sure that this letter was essentially fraud. A month goes by with no response from the biker's mom. So Teddy is thinking it's all over, right? Nope. One day out of the blue, the mom shows up at his house, during the day when Teddy isn't home. This is third hand from his wife, but apparently it went from, "How could you be so heartless, give me money," to, "This is all your fault," to a shrieking, "You murdered my son," in a very short time. Teddy's wife was a Filipina, coolest lady you're likely to meet, amazing cook, tough as nails and always in charge, and took precisely no nonsense from anyone. Being a social worker, she knew exactly how to handle unreasonable people. She closed and locked the door, called the police, and then called Teddy at work. You could hear this woman ranting, even through a closed door, over a cell phone that wasn't even in speakerphone mode, and through another cell phone not on speaker. Cops arrive, and the woman was arrested for terroristic threats, disturbing the peace and trespassing. Teddy and his wife got a protective order, and that, thankfully, was the last they heard from this woman. Teddy's car had some major scratches and dents along the driver's side and a cracked taillight. Other cars were similar, and the panel truck had a massive dent in the rear door. Insurance paid for it, and I assume they either went after the kid's insurance or his estate, which was probably the value of the motorcycle at best, drugs and all, and we never heard anything about the legal threats after he sent them to his car insurance company.